When peace feels unfamiliar, restoration begins here. This is P.I.P.E Podcast. Hey, welcome back to P.I.P.E Podcast. I'm Kizzy Mayfield, and I'm really glad you're here today. A few days ago, I found something I had completely forgotten about. It was an old blog post I had written in 2016, 10 years ago. I opened it and started reading, and honestly, I just sat there. Not because I remembered the pain. I definitely remember the pain. I sat there because I realized I had spent the last 10 years discovering the answer to the question I was asking. Back then, I thought I was asking God one question: is God really good? Today, I don't think that was the real question at all. I think I was asking, can I trust his heart? There's a big difference. See, in 2016, my life looked really good from the outside. I had worked incredibly hard. I was fit. I was always dressed well. My kids were always put together. My home looked beautiful. People would have looked at my life and thought, she's got it all together. But they didn't know what it felt like to be me. Because while my outside looked beautiful, my inside still felt so shattered. In the blog, I described myself as stained glass. I said I didn't want to be stained glass anymore. I just wanted to be whole. And if I'm honest, I don't think I even knew what whole meant. I thought wholeness meant looking like none of it had ever happened. I desperately wanted God to erase every scar, every memory, every trigger, every wound. I wanted him to put me back into the garden, back before the abuse, before the rejection, before the fear, before shame. I wanted all my hard work to erase the hard world. I had done everything I knew to do. I had worked harder than most people around me. I had survived. I had obeyed. I had built this beautiful life. So why? Why did I feel so broken? I remember writing those words. I remember writing these words. A good father doesn't require me to work to be good to me. When I read that this week, I cried because somehow 10 years ago, my heart already knew something my mind couldn't believe. I knew what a good father should be. I just wasn't convinced God was that father. I kept waiting for him to prove it. In that same blog, I wrote something that honestly surprised me. I said, I want God to do something so big, so personal, that I know why he chose me. When I read that, I realized I wasn't asking for a miracle. I was asking for evidence. Evidence that I mattered. Evidence that I had been chosen. Evidence that I wasn't forgotten. I don't think I wanted a platform. I don't think I even wanted significance. I think I wanted certainty. I wanted to know that the Father saw me. Growing up in church, I watched people receive incredible prophetic words. People would stand in front of the church and someone would speak over their life. People would talk about these incredible encounters with God. And I had beautiful moments with him too, private, sacred moments. But somewhere inside of me, I quietly believed that if God really wanted me, surely he would do something big, something undeniable, something everyone could see. Looking back, I realized I was measuring his love by visible evidence. And underneath all of that was a little girl asking one question: Father, would you choose me too? There was another sentence in that blog that stopped me this week. I wrote, I've done some pretty big things with a little God. 10 years ago, I thought my problem was that my view of God's power was too small. Today, I think my view of his heart was too small because I never doubted he was powerful. I doubted whether he was personally good to me, whether he delighted in me, whether he really wanted me. I think that's the question I carried most of my life. Not, does God exist? Not, is he powerful? But, am I really wanted? And I think that question shaped almost everything I did. It shaped the way I worked, the way I parented, the way I served, the way I viewed myself, the way I viewed God. I spent years trying to become the woman I thought he would finally delight in. What I realized was I wasn't really looking for perfection. I was looking for peace. And I thought if I became beautiful enough, disciplined enough, spiritual enough, successful enough, eventually my inside would finally look like my outside. I was chasing a version of myself that never existed. And that realization, it changes everything because it forces me to ask a different question. What if God wasn't trying to make me perfect? What if he is trying to show me his heart? So, what happened over the next 10 years? Did God answer all of my prayers? No. Did he, or did life suddenly become easy? Absolutely not. In fact, life got harder in ways I never imagined. There were losses and disappointments, questions I still can't answer. There were seasons where I honestly wondered if I knew God at all. Then something happened that completely changed how I saw my own story. I realized I had been asking God for the wrong miracle. For years, I thought healing meant becoming the woman I would have been if none of it had ever happened. I wanted the abuse erased, the rejection erased, the fear erased, all of my anxiety to be erased. I wanted God to make me look like Genesis 2 again, like the fall never happened, like I had never tasted evil, like my inside could finally match the picture I worked so hard to create on the outside. If I prayed enough and healed enough, worked hard enough, obeyed enough, eventually I would become whole. But then someone asked me a question and they said, did you want healing or did you want your innocence back? I never thought about it that way. 10 years ago, I would have answered without hesitation, healing. Of course, healing. But today, I think the answer is different. Because once you've lived in a world, you can never unlearn it. Once you've seen abuse, you can't unknow abuse. Once you've experienced betrayal, you can't unknow betrayal. And once you've watched people you love suffer, you can't unknow suffering. The box is shattered, and you don't get to go back. And that's when I realized I wasn't asking God for healing. I was asking him to put me back into the garden, back before the knowledge of good and evil, back before trauma, before the fear, back before shame. But history, it doesn't allow us to move backwards. And God never promised to take us back to Eden. He promised that one day he would make all things new. Those aren't the same thing. And somehow, this realization brings me peace because I finally stopped trying to work my way back to a life that no longer existed. There was another question someone asked me. And honestly, it was one of the hardest questions I've ever asked. They asked, would you remove your scars today if it meant losing what they've taught you about the Father? And for a long time, I thought Christians were supposed to answer no. Like somehow we were supposed to be grateful for every terrible thing that happened. But that's not my answer. My answer is yes. I'd erase the abuse. I would erase my fear. I would erase the rejection. I would erase the nights that little girl cried herself to sleep. I would erase the ways my own children have been affected by the wounds I was still carrying. Because I don't believe God wanted those things for me. I don't believe trauma is his design. And I don't believe evil is his lesson plan. But something happened a few years ago that completely changed how I thought about this. I met a young woman at a healing retreat. When we started talking, I asked her what kind of trauma she experienced growing up. And she just looked at me and smiled and said, honestly, I really haven't. She had a loving mom, a loving dad, a safe home, grandparents who adored her. She wasn't pretending life had been perfect. But compared to my story, it was incredibly healthy. And what struck me wasn't jealousy. It was realization. She knew the Father's love deeply, not because she survived trauma, but because she has experienced healthy love. And that changed me because I realized something I believed for years wasn't actually true. Trauma doesn't make you know God better. Sometimes it makes him harder to trust. I don't celebrate what happened to me. I celebrate what God has redeemed. Those are very different things. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, something else started changing. Not just how I saw God, how I saw myself. 10 years ago, my outside and my inside were telling two different stories. I wanted everyone to believe I had it together, not because I was fake, because I desperately wanted it to be true. Today, I'm not trying to convince anyone I'm perfect. I don't care if I spill coffee on my shirt. I don't care if my outfit isn't perfect. I don't care if I make a mistake. I don't care if my body doesn't look the way it did when I was 30. Life has happened. I've been hurt. I've laughed. I've cried. I've failed. And honestly, I'm okay with people seeing that now. If someone asks me, how are you? I try not to automatically say, I'm fine. I will actually stop and think about it. I ask myself, how am I really? And sometimes that answer isn't the most comfortable, but it's true. And I've learned something. Truth brings freedom. Pretending never did. I used to think healing meant becoming perfect. Today, I think healing means I no longer have to hide. Because perfection always hides. Love doesn't. And for the first time in my life, I realized something I never saw in 2016. Maybe God wasn't asking me to become someone else. Maybe he was inviting the real me to come out of hiding. And that's when I finally began to understand the Father I've been looking for had been walking toward me all along. So, did I ever get the answer? Did God ever do the big thing I asked him to do? The grand gesture, the undeniable proof, the moment where I would have never questioned his love again? The answer is yes, just not the way I expected. For years, I thought I was waiting for one unforgettable moment, one miracle, one prophetic word, one extraordinary experience that could finally convince me, Kizia, I chose you. But somewhere over the last 10 years, I've realized something. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was looking for evidence, evidence that I mattered, evidence that my life wasn't in vain, evidence that I had been chosen. Because if I'm honest, I think the greatest fear wasn't God would leave me. I think the greatest fear was that He would never fully choose me. When you've lived through abuse and rejection, being abandoned and being misunderstood, being controlled, it's very easy to begin believing one lie. Maybe I'm just too much, too broken, too emotional, too difficult, too damaged. Maybe people don't leave because life is hard. Maybe they leave because of me. That lie followed me into my relationship with God. I didn't question His power. I questioned whether His heart was for me. Looking back, I think that's why purpose became so important to me. Legacy became so important. Significance became so important. I thought I wanted God to use me. Today, I think I understand what I was really asking. I wasn't asking for influence. I was asking, Father, does my life matter to you? Would you choose me too? And here's what I've discovered. The Father was never waiting to choose me. He already had. Before I accomplished anything, before I survived anything, before I built anything, before anyone even knew my name, before I ever questioned Him, before I ever loved Him, He had already chosen me. Jesus says, you did not choose me, but I chose you. Do you know what changed me? It wasn't one spectacular miracle. It wasn't one unforgettable moment. It was looking back over 10 years and realizing He never left. There wasn't one giant display of His love. There were thousands of quiet moments, moments I almost missed because they weren't dramatic enough. He was there when I couldn't feel Him. He was there when I doubted Him. He was there when I walked away. He was there when I came back. He was there while I was trying to earn what He had already given me. The Father I was asking to reveal Himself had been walking beside me all along. And today, if I could sit beside the woman who wrote that blog, I don't think I'd try to answer her question. I don't think I'd explain suffering. I don't think I would tell her everything is going to work out. I think I'd simply hold her hand and I'd say, you're asking God to become a father. He already is. One day, you're going to discover He wasn't waiting for you to become whole before He loved you. His love is what has been making you whole all along. Back then, I thought wholeness meant looking like none of it had ever happened. But today, I think wholeness means there's no part of me I'm afraid to bring before my Father. Not my scars, not my questions, not my failures, not my grief or my doubt, just all of me. Because I've finally learned something. The Father isn't asking for the version of me that was never hurt. He was asking for the real me, the woman who's still healing, the woman who still has questions, the woman who still wishes some things had never happened, the woman who's learning to trust him one day at a time. That's the daughter he wants. There are still days I wish none of it had happened. I still wish that little girl had never been abused. I still wish my children had never felt the ripple effects of my pain. I don't think those wishes make my faith smaller. I think they make me human. But today, I no longer measure God's goodness by whether he erased my scars. I measure it by the fact that he never stopped meeting me in them. 10 years ago, I wanted my life to be a perfect picture. Today, I have a different prayer. Father, make my heart look like yours. Because if people leave my home, my conversations, my life, I don't need them to think I'm impressive. I don't need them to think I have everything together. I don't need them to remember my story. I want them to leave knowing something about you. I want them to experience the kind of father I spent years looking for. A father who isn't afraid of broken people. A father who isn't wanting for perfection. A father who doesn't love us because we've earned it, but a father who runs towards us. A father who stays. Maybe that answer I was looking for all along. Not, is God good? But the Father is better than I knew. Thank you for sitting with me today. If you're listening and you're carrying questions you've been afraid to ask, I hope you know you're not alone. God has never been afraid of honest questions. In fact, some of the deepest things he's taught me began with one. This is P.I.P.E. Plug into positive energy. And until next time, remember this. The Father you may still be asking to reveal himself may already be walking beside you. You just don't recognize his footsteps yet. Thank you for sitting with us today, where restoration begins.